Welcome to the Rabbi's Message. This is Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky bringing you a weekly Torah portion message that is read in most synagogues throughout the world. This week's Torah portion that will be read this coming Saturday in synagogues is called Parshat Ki Teitzei, which comes from the last of the 5 books of Moses, known as Deuteronomy, Divarim, Parshat Ki Teitzei. What's interesting about this week's Torah portion, it focuses on a very important and unique lesson and message for each and every person in understanding how to be a better parent, communication skills between a parent and a child, who is responsible when things don't work out the way we hope them to be. Every person sets out their life with a relationship, a loving relationship, and looks forward for that day, that moment, when they can take that love, they can share those special moments together, the ideas, ideological approach to life, the joys, the memories, and pass that education to another generation, building the future of our community, understanding the value that when you listen and you are coherent and you focus properly as a parent, things will be passed on to the next generation. What's interesting in this week's Torah portion, we stumble across a very disturbing episode. The Holy Zohar, written by the great master known as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the mystical wing and interpretation to the 5 books of Moses, to the Torah. The Zohar asks a question. And the Zohar says first a statement, and they say that the way it worked at Mount Sinai, God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. God taught the Torah to Moses, and then dictated Moses word by word, letter by letter, law by law, and Moses inscribed it. Moses inscribed God's wisdom, God's teaching. Now imagine if you were hired to be the person as a personal assistant to the author, and your job is simply to listen and listen to every word that was dictated to you and type it up, put it on a file. Would you ever turn around to the author and say, you know, this one's a no-no. This one doesn't work. The author would say, thank you, but that's not what I hired you for. I have others that check over the script, make sure it makes sense. Your job is simply to take the words that I say and put it on the paper. The Zohar tells us a fascinating interaction. From all the laws, the 613 commandments, 365 negative, 248 positive commandments, the do's, the don'ts, there was never one argument. God spoke, Moses wrote. God spoke, Moses wrote. Never once did he challenge and say, you know, God, you got it wrong. Oh no, this is your book, but it ain't going into it. Besides, in this week's Torah portion, God delivers a law, teaches Moses the law, and Moses says, oh no, I cannot put this into your book. Listen to those words. I can't put this into your book. Could you imagine such a concept? You know what's interesting? We're talking about the law of a ben sorer umorer. Loosely translated, it's known as the rebellious son. This law, I'm going to read to you the law, that you understand the way the verse describes these laws. And Moses says no. It says, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey the voice of his father and the voice of his mother, and does not listen to them, When they discipline him, the verse continues, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders of the gates of the town. And they shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He does not obey our voice. And therefore, we say, then all the men of the town shall stone him to death. And you must purge an evil from amongst you. All Israel will hear this, and they will be afraid. God tells Moses, I want this law in the Torah. Moses says, which father or mother would ever do such a concept? Impossible. As much as you want it in, I can't write this down. I can't put the feather to the parchment. I can't take the quill and say, hey, we're going to make this happen. Let me write in this law. It doesn't work for me. Until literally God goes back and forth with a debate with Moses. And he finally explains that this is not something that's a reality. It's more a lesson. It's a theoretical lesson. Only then the Holy Zohar goes on to describe how Moses continues to put this interesting episode, this law of the rebellious child. You know, what's interesting is that many centuries later, this same confusion, the same sentiments that Moses felt, echoed many centuries later. In the time of the Talmudic sages in the 2nd century, the harshness of this law, that parents would take their child and say before the elders of the town that my child, my son is a rebellious son, they were not comfortable with this. And they went ahead and they interpreted this, that they said there are many, many laws that have to take place, to the point that it says that there was never in the history of the world, that never there was and never there will be someone that fits this category as the rebellious son. Because they say there are many laws that have to comply. That first of all, the son has to be a minor, but not a real minor. Has to be within 3 months of their 13th birthday. Second of all, it says that the son has to have the same voice, the same sound of his voice, like his father and like his mother, which seemingly doesn't happen. Parents come from 2 different sets of parents, the likelihood of having 2 parents that sound exactly the same. And there are many other interesting details to the amount of wine and meat that needs to be consumed, that seemingly it's impossible, as the Talmud states, for this to actually occur in the real world. And they come to the conclusion and they ask, if this is the case, if this is the case that this interesting law, God pushed Moses and convinced him to write this law in, is not a practical law, why is it here? Was there extra ink that we needed to use and introduce another law? If it's never going to be used, if it's impossible for this law to be used, then why introduce it? And the Talmud concludes that this is not a law of reality, it's a theoretical law, but more importantly, it's a law to teach the human being the power of relationships. Teach the human being, teach a father, a mother, what it means to raise a child. Teach a child what it means to be someone, an offspring of those parents. You know, they say a story that at one time in a military class, the professor asks the students, what is the difference between an engagement and a battle? And no one in the group offered any answer. The professor, obviously hearing this, was frustrated. And he said, didn't anyone read the material in the book? How could it be nobody knows the answer? Finally, one individual that knew the answer said as follows. He said, I know the answer. An engagement is a thing that came before marriage, he said, while the battle is what followed it. Now you might say, cute joke, a cute line, engagement, battle. What is this lesson? What is the message from the seemingly disturbing episode, this law of the rebellious son? What does it mean to us today? I believe it's found and it's embedded in the words that God asked Moses to describe. And when Moses wrote these words, and he said that he doesn't listen to the voice of the father and the voice of the mother. If you think about this from a deeper perspective, why use that terminology? Why can't it just say simply, it doesn't listen to his parents? There's a message here. And the message is, when a relationship between a husband and a wife, when a relationship between the parents of that child is a voice of the father and a voice of the mother, two separate voices, two separate opinions, two different approaches in parenting. I have my way, you have your way. Let me live. It's my child. Let me educate them and influence them the way I think. The father says, I'm the father. Shouldn't I know how to parent my son? The mother says, I gave birth to this child. Part of me is right there. I carried 9 months that child. It was a difficult labor, difficult delivery. Person's going to say, wow, two different opinions, two different approaches. Does it work? God tells Moses, write this verse in. Teach the world. Don't call your child that your child is a child that argues. Your child is a child that's stubborn, rebellious. Your child is a reaction. Your child is someone that saw constantly conflict. The father said this, the mother said that. That's not a rebellious child. That's a child that's affected by society. That's a child that's been improperly engaged, directed. There's two symphonies going on. One is called the father and one's called the mother. The child knows which buttons they can push. I know I can get my father to listen. I know what my mother needs to hear. There is a separate voice of the father and a separate voice of the mother. In fact, we see this when you go back to the verse that it says. It says that when they come before the elders of the city, they have to say, he does not obey our voice. It doesn't anymore say the voice of the father and the voice of the mother. In order to be that rebellious child, there has to be the parents that are in sync, and then the child rebels against that leadership. If there's two separate voices, if there's two separate approaches to parenting, you can't blame the child. That's when we have to do an internal search as a parent and say, wait a second, what type of child are we raising here? Is this child a rebellious child? Or is this child a creation from our rebellion? That we don't understand how to communicate. The conflict between the husband and the wife, of course it has reactions. Of course it has deep, lasting reactions. The Torah is teaching man the importance of how to raise a child. The key and most important factor in the relationship and development of a child is the idea that there has to be in sync. There has to be one voice. That's why when the Talmud goes ahead and interprets, it says that in order for child to be a rebellious child, to be stoned, could you imagine a parent taking their child to be stoned? Moses was uproared. How could it be? Who's going to do that? That's why the verse says that he has the same voice as the father and the mother. He sounds the same. If he sounds the same, and then he's rebellious, it's a different animal, different reality. And to this, the rabbis tell us, it will never happen. Because truly, if there is that same voice, if the child sounds the same, he will never rebel against his parents. It just doesn't work. Children are an offspring from our actions. The way we interact with another human being, the way we act, the way we think, the way we engage in our lifestyle. So many people say, I need my space. I need my own thing that I do. I want my child to be perfect. But it's okay. I can still live the same type of lifestyle. I don't have to change. I'll just give him a good education. I'll give her the best that I can. But myself, I threw in the towel. It's not going to make a difference. This week's Torah portion teaches the lesson of the rebellious child and how this will never exist in the reality of the real world, such a case, because there is no such thing. That if parents are simply on the same page, that they would have a child like that. If parents are really in sync, and it's not my way, it's not your way, but it's our way. How are we raising our children? It's not that you make decisions about this and I will make decisions about that. There has to be that equal understanding and that respect, that in sync, that harmony. The melody of marriage has to sing at all time. When you listen to two people sing on two different tones, it sounds horrible. It's annoying. You say, if they only sing in tune. But wait a second. When people go through life with such a marriage, a relationship, that it's singing to two separate tunes, no one ever says. They say, okay, I learned to live with it. What does that mean? This week's Torah portion teaches the human being, the one that really cares. And that's why God put this interesting law into the Torah. Because God wants the person to understand that the way to raise the children, the way to raise our next generation, the way to instill proper structure in this world is simply by teaching all mankind that the first generation has to be in sync. They are role models. They are the inspiration. They are the guidance. They are the ones that you look to and you say, I get it. It makes sense. I want that too. When a parent is a true pillar and an inspiration, the child cleaves. The child grows and glows and says, wow, this is what I want to connect to. I want to cling to this individual. Yes, it's my parent, but everything about them, I want to be just like that. When parents have conflict, lack of communication, it's my thing, it's your thing. The child says, if that's the case, then I also have my thing. You guys can't get along. Why would I use you as a role model? I'm hoping that a person listens to this profound message and says, wow, the ink that Moses spent on writing this interesting law, that he debated with God, and God insisted that we're going to write this law, even as the rabbis interpret, can never ever happen. Never did and never will. This law was only written to teach us today a unique and profound message, how to be a better human being, how to be a better member of society, and most important, how to be a more profound, directed, and inspirational parent. I'm hoping a person walks away and says, you know something, we need to be in sync. If my wife and I, or my husband and I, don't think the same way, and don't feel the same way, then unfortunately, when the child is rebellious, there's only one person to point the finger to, and that's yourselves. But when you are in sync, and you are doing everything you can, and there's that check and balance, there's that support system, there's that pillar There's that icon that the child looks to and says, my parents have it right. They believe, they trust each other, they care for each other, they nurture each other. That's the type of relationship. That's what I want in my life. I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I want to wish you all a great week. I want to wish you all a week of harmony, a week of in sync, a week of communication. And most importantly, I want to bless everyone that we should have joy and happiness from all our children and all our offsprings. You're listening to the Rabbi's Message with Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky. We'll be back same time, same place next week.